The glow of the streetlights flickered against the sleek black car as Jason Statham sat behind the wheel, his jaw clenched. His fingers drummed against the steering wheel, replaying the last phone call in his mind. The voice on the other end had been distorted, masked, but the message had been clear. Roger was just the beginning. The real power runs deeper than you think. If you want the truth, meet me at midnight, alone. Jason didn't trust easily, and after what had happened to Roger, the corrupt HOA president he had exposed, he knew this wasn't just about parking violations and HOA fees anymore. Someone bigger had been pulling the strings. Someone powerful enough to let Roger take the fall while they remained hidden. His eyes flicked to the clock. 11:55 p.m. He was already at the meeting spot, an empty construction site on the edge of town. Abandoned trucks and skeletal buildings loomed in the darkness. The perfect place for a setup. Jason stepped out of the car, his boots crunching against the gravel. His instincts were razor sharp. Years of experience told him this could be a trap. He scanned the area, catching movement in the shadows. "Show yourself," Jason called out. A figure emerged from the darkness. A man, hood pulled over his head, hands shaking slightly. He was nervous. "You came alone?" the man asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Jason crossed his arms. "Yeah, start talking." The man hesitated, glancing over his shoulder. "You don't understand what you're dealing with. Roger was nothing. The real operation? It's bigger than you can imagine. They don't just control the HOA. They control..." A sharp crack split the silence. The man's body jerked. His eyes widened in shock. Blood bloomed across his chest. "Sniper." Jason dived for cover as another shot rang out, kicking up dust and debris where he had just stood. He reached for his gun, but the shooter was already gone. The night swallowed them whole. Jason rushed to the man, but it was too late. He was choking on his own blood, trying to speak. Jason leaned in. "Who are they? Tell me!" The man's lips parted, barely managing to whisper a single word before his body went limp. "Holloway." Jason's blood ran cold. He knew that name, Charles Holloway, the newly appointed HOA president. This wasn't just a random killing. This was a message. Jason sat in his apartment, staring at his laptop. The glow from the screen illuminated his face, but his mind was racing. Holloway. He typed the name into his private database, cross-referencing everything he could find. Publicly, Charles Holloway was a well-respected businessman, a property developer who had taken over the HOA after Roger's downfall. But something didn't add up. Jason clicked through documents, financial reports, property deals, and then he saw it. A series of shady real estate transactions tied to the HOA. Huge amounts of money being funneled through shell companies. Land being sold and bought at manipulated prices. Some of the properties had even been taken from homeowners under false violations. The HOA had forced people out and resold their homes at a massive profit. Jason exhaled sharply. This wasn't just corruption. It was organized crime. His phone buzzed. "Olivia," he answered. "Tell me you've got something." Her voice was tense. "I checked the financials like you asked." "Jason, this is bad. The HOA is a front for a laundering operation. Real estate fraud, bribery, even intimidation tactics to silence anyone who fights back." Jason nodded. "Yeah, I just watched someone die for trying to tell me that." A pause. Then Olivia's voice dropped. "Jason, if Holloway's involved, you need to be careful. He's got connections. Cops, politicians, even people in the media. He can bury this before it ever sees daylight." Jason clenched his jaw. "Not if I get to him first." The next morning, Jason walked into his gym like nothing had happened. The scent of sweat and iron filled the air. He wrapped his hands, preparing for a training session, when he noticed something off. A man was watching him from the corner. Dark suit, sunglasses, too well dressed for a gym. Jason continued wrapping his hands, but he was already calculating, observing. The man approached. "You're making dangerous enemies," he said smoothly. Jason smirked. "That's so?" The man slipped something into Jason's hand, a small USB drive. "Walk away," the man said. "Drop this before you end up like your informant." Jason's grip tightened around the drive. The man turned to leave. "Last warning, Statham." Jason watched him go, his pulse steady. Then he looked at the drive. He didn't know what was on it yet, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't walking away. Jason paced across his apartment, the USB drive burning in his hand like a loaded gun. He plugged it into his laptop, heart pounding as folders opened on the screen. Encrypted documents, bank transactions, property deals. Everything pointed to Charles Holloway. The man had stepped in as the HOA's new president after Roger's arrest, clean, polished, and charming in front of the cameras. But behind the curtain, he was running the same operation, just on a much bigger scale. Jason's eyes scanned through the files, payments made to city officials, under-the-table property deals. But there was something else buried deeper, offshore accounts and fake shell companies registered under different names. His phone buzzed. "Olivia." Jason answered without looking away from the screen. "What did you find?" Her voice was low, anxious. "Jason, you're stepping into something bigger than you realize." Jason's brow furrowed. "I know Holloway's dirty, probably dirtier than Roger ever was." "It's not just him," Olivia whispered. "I did some digging. The same shell companies show up in multiple cities. Miami, Chicago, Atlanta. Everywhere there's been a sudden spike in wrongful evictions and property seizures. This isn't just one corrupt HOA. It's a whole network." Jason's jaw clenched. He knew the system was dirty, but this... "They're laundering money," Olivia continued. "Millions, maybe billions. Real estate fraud, political payoffs, and anyone who gets too close either disappears or ends up like your informant." Jason leaned back in his chair, mind racing. "How high does this go?" A long silence. Then Olivia's voice dropped lower. "City officials, developers, maybe even senators." Jason exhaled slowly. Now he understood why they wanted him out of the way. By midday, Jason was parked outside Holloway's office, a sleek glass building overlooking the city. Everything about Holloway screamed power. Untouchable. Jason watched from his car, his mind replaying Olivia's warning. This wasn't just about corruption anymore. This was about control. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. He answered. "You're poking around where you don't belong, Statham." Jason's pulse quickened. "You should have walked away after Roger," the voice continued. "But now you're in the deep end, and you can't swim." Jason's grip tightened around the phone. "Who is this?" A cold chuckle echoed through the line. "Back off, or you'll regret it." The line went dead. Jason's eyes flicked back to the office building. The windows reflected the sun, cold and unforgiving. He knew one thing for certain. They were watching him. By nightfall, Jason was at a rundown motel on the outskirts of town. Off the grid, no cameras, no credit cards. He sat at a small table with Olivia, going through the USB files one by one. "This is enough to expose them," Olivia whispered. "If we leak these documents, they'll bury it," Jason cut in. "The cops, the media, they own all of it." Olivia's eyes flicked toward the window. She hadn't told Jason, but she'd noticed the same dark SUV parked down the street for the last 2 hours. "They're watching both of us now," she murmured. Jason leaned forward, voice low. "Then we hit them where they can't control the narrative." Olivia glanced at him. "Social media." Jason nodded. "We take the story straight to the people, but we need undeniable proof, something they can't spin." Olivia hesitated. "There's one more place we can look, but if we go there, we're all in," Jason finished. Olivia swallowed hard. She knew what that meant. The next morning, Jason's burner phone buzzed. A single text message. "Warehouse, midnight, come alone." So, he knew it was a trap, but traps worked both ways. Jason slipped on his jacket, tucking a small camera inside his lapel. If they wanted to set him up, he'd set them up first. Olivia insisted on coming with him, but Jason shut her down. They already tried to kill one informant. They won't hesitate to come after you too. She grabbed his arm before he left. Be careful, Jason. Jason nodded, but they both knew there was no such thing as careful anymore. The warehouse loomed dark and silent, its windows shattered from years of abandonment. Jason's boots echoed against the concrete as he stepped inside. A single overhead light flicked on. Holloway stood waiting, flanked by two armed men. Jason smirked. Didn't know HOA meetings came with bodyguards. Holloway's smile was thin. You're a persistent little problem, aren't you? Jason's gaze flicked to the camera hidden in his jacket. He needed them to talk, needed them to confess. You killed that informant, Jason said calmly. Framed Roger. Stole homes from black families. What's next? Selling kids out of the community pool. Holloway's smile faded. You think you're funny? Jason stepped closer, his voice low. I think you're scared. Holloway's eyes narrowed. He nodded to one of the guards, who pulled out a small black pouch and tossed it at Jason's feet. Jason crouched down, opening it, his own fingerprints all over a bag of cocaine. That's enough to put you away for 10 years, Holloway said softly. You won't make it to trial. Jason's blood boiled, but he kept his face cold. I'm not going down alone. Holloway's smile returned. You already are. The night air was thick with tension as Jason scrolled through the files on his laptop. His instincts had been right. The HOA wasn't just about corrupt leadership or scamming residents. It was a front for something much bigger. Buried beneath layers of fake accounts and dummy corporations, Jason uncovered shady real estate deals worth millions. The HOA was secretly buying out black-owned homes and businesses at dirt-cheap prices, forcing people out through harassment, fraudulent fines, and legal loopholes. Then the properties were resold to powerful investors for massive profits. Jason clenched his jaw. This wasn't just corruption. This was organized theft. A soft knock at the motel door. Jason tensed, grabbing his gun before peering through the peephole. Olivia. He let her in quickly. She looked over her shoulder before stepping inside, her face pale. I shouldn't be here, she whispered. But you are, Jason said, which means you found something. She hesitated, then handed him a flash drive. Internal records, she said. Emails, contracts, proof that Charles Holloway is pulling the strings. But Jason, if he finds out I gave this to you. Jason placed a firm hand on her shoulder. I won't let that happen. She met his gaze, fear flickering in her eyes. I've seen what Holloway does to people who cross him, she murmured. You don't understand how dangerous he is. Jason smirked. Then it's time I meet him. The HOA office was quiet when Jason walked in. Too quiet. The receptionist's eyes widened as he strode past her desk. Sir, you can't. He pushed open the glass doors to Charles Holloway's office. Holloway sat behind a sleek mahogany desk, coolly swirling a glass of whiskey. His suit was crisp, his silver hair neatly combed back. Unlike Roger, this man radiated power. Well, Holloway said smoothly, if it isn't Jason Statham. To what do I owe the pleasure? Jason tossed the flash drive onto the desk. Let's talk about all the homes you've stolen. Holloway sighed, picking up the drive like it was a useless trinket. Ah, so you've been digging. He smirked. That's unfortunate. Jason leaned forward. You're finished. The evidence is all here. Emails, transfers, fraudulent citations. This whole operation. It's coming down, Holloway chuckled, shaking his head. You think you're the first person to come at me with evidence? The first hero who thought they could take me down? Jason's muscles tensed. You see, Holloway continued, men like me don't lose. We don't go to prison. We own the system. Judges, cops, politicians, they all answer to me. Jason's jaw tightened. Not for long. Holloway leaned in, his expression darkening. You don't understand how this game is played, Statham. He smiled coldly. You should have taken my warning. Jason's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Check the news. Jason pulled up a live news feed, and his stomach dropped. Breaking. Jason Statham under investigation for wire fraud. Breaking into HOA offices. He slowly looked up at Holloway, whose smirk deepened. That was your last warning, Holloway said softly. Two security guards stepped into the office behind Jason, guns at their sides. Jason clenched his fists. He could fight his way out, but that wouldn't clear his name. He needed a new plan. Without a word, he turned and walked out. For now. Jason's mind raced as he drove away. Holloway had him backed into a corner. He was framed, and now the police were after him. The city lights blurred past as he gripped the wheel. He needed to disappear, fast. His phone rang. Olivia. "They're looking for you," she said urgently. "The police. They have a warrant." Jason exhaled sharply. "I know." "Jason." Her voice wavered. "They're watching me too." Jason's hands tightened on the wheel. Holloway wasn't just after him. He was going after Olivia now. Jason took a deep breath. He had two choices, run or fight smarter. He chose the second. It was time to hit back harder. The city streets were nearly empty as Jason drove through the dimly lit roads, his mind racing. Framed, hunted, and now Olivia was in danger. He needed to think ahead, predict Holloway's next move. But Holloway was already ahead of him. Jason turned onto a quiet stretch of road, gripping the wheel tightly. The night was still, except for the soft hum of the engine beneath him. Then, a warning light on the dashboard. Tire pressure low. His gut twisted. Something was wrong. He tapped the brakes, but the pedals sank to the floor. Oh, no response. His car was speeding forward, completely out of control. Jason's instincts kicked in. He yanked the emergency brake, but it barely slowed him down. The steering felt off, like someone had tampered with it. Ahead, the road curved sharply toward a bridge. Jason had seconds to react. Thinking fast, he threw the car into a sharp skid, aiming for a row of trash bins lining the sidewalk. The car spun violently, metal screeching, sparks flying, before slamming into the bins with a bone-rattling crash. The airbags deployed, slamming into his chest like a sledgehammer. But he was alive. His head was spinning, his heart pounding. Then, footsteps. Jason barely had time to unbuckle before the first masked man appeared, yanking open the car door. A second man smashed a baton across his ribs, pain exploding through Jason's side. 3 attackers, all masked, all prepared. One grabbed Jason by the collar, slamming him against the wrecked car. "You don't listen, do you?" the man growled. "Holloway told you to back off." Jason coughed, tasting blood. "You tell Holloway. I don't scare easy." The man punched him hard in the stomach. Jason grunted, doubling over. Then came the real message. One of them pulled out a knife and pressed it against Jason's throat. "This is your last warning," the masked man hissed. "Next time, you don't walk away." Jason moved fast. He grabbed the attacker's wrist, twisting it violently. The knife clattered to the ground. Using his shoulder, he rammed the second man into the car door, making him stumble. The third man swung the baton. Jason ducked, then drove his fist straight into the attacker's ribs. Crack. One man left. The leader hesitated, just for a second. Jason grabbed the discarded knife, flipped it in his hand, and pressed it against the man's throat. The street was silent. "Who sent you?" Jason growled. The man didn't answer. Jason tightened his grip. "I'll ask one more time." The attacker chuckled. "You already know." Jason's eyes darkened. "Then you can deliver a message for me." He slammed the man's head against the car, hard, before letting him drop to the ground. Sirens echoed in the distance. Jason grabbed his phone and bolted into the shadows. He couldn't stay here. He had to get to Olivia. Across town, Olivia was already in danger. She had barely closed her laptop when her power cut out. The apartment fell into darkness. Her stomach twisted. She reached for her phone, but before she could dial Jason's number, the lock on her front door clicked. Her breath caught in her throat. Someone was inside. Footsteps, slow, deliberate. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears. Moving quickly, she grabbed a knife from the kitchen drawer and backed into the shadows. A silhouette appeared in the doorway. She gripped the knife tighter. The man stepped forward, masked, just like Jason's attackers. "Miss Hayes," the man murmured, "you've been very helpful, but we can't have loose ends." He took another step. Then, crash! The front door exploded inward as Jason tackled the intruder. The two men slammed into the floor, struggling for control. The attacker reached for his gun. Jason grabbed his wrist and twisted. A shot rang out, shattering a lamp. Jason punched the man hard, knocking him unconscious. Olivia stood frozen, her breathing ragged. Jason wiped blood from his lip. "Pack a bag. We're leaving." She didn't argue. 15 minutes later, they were back on the road. Jason's wrecked car was abandoned, and they were now in Olivia's vehicle, driving fast. Her hands were gripping the wheel so tightly her knuckles were white. "They're trying to erase us," she whispered. "Not just scare us, erase us." Jason stared out at the dark road ahead. "We're not running anymore," he said. "We're hitting back." Because now, it was personal. The night air was thick with tension as Jason pulled up outside the abandoned house. It sat at the end of a forgotten street, windows boarded up, weeds growing through cracked pavement. This was the address he traced from the mysterious caller's last known signal. But something felt wrong. Jason stepped out of the car, keeping his guard up. No lights, no movement. Whoever had called him either wasn't here, or didn't want to be found. He tried the front door. Locked. With a glance around to make sure no one was watching, he moved to a side window. A few hard pushes, and the old wood frame gave way. Sliding inside, Jason landed lightly on his feet. Dark, dusty, silent. The air smelled stale, like no one had been here for a long time. But as Jason moved further inside, he saw something strange. A single desk lamp was on in the back room. Someone had been here, recently. Jason's gut tightened. This wasn't just an empty house. This was a dead drop. A place where someone left something important. And that meant he wasn't alone. The room was mostly empty, except for an old wooden desk. And on it, a laptop still open, screen glowing. Jason approached carefully. Was this a trap, a setup? He touched the mouse. The screen came to life. And what he saw made his blood run cold. Emails, transactions, bank records. The entire history of HOA corruption. Bribery, fraud, stolen funds. But it was worse than that. Jason clicked deeper into the files. The HOA wasn't just laundering money. They were covering up violent crimes. There were payoffs to city officials, police officers, even judges. And then, one email caught his eye. Subject: the problem with Statham. It was from Charles Holloway. Jason clicked. Our friend has been too curious. We need to shut him down before he digs any deeper. If he doesn't back off, we'll do it the hard way. Jason clenched his fists. This wasn't just about HOA corruption anymore. This was organized crime. Holloway wasn't running a neighborhood scam. He was running an empire. Jason pulled out his phone. He had to get this information out now. But before he could take a picture, clang, the unmistakable sound of a lock turning. Jason's head snapped toward the doorway. Footsteps, heavy, deliberate. Someone was outside. They knew he'd come. He grabbed the laptop and backed toward the window, but metal bars had been bolted over it from the outside. No way out. The footsteps stopped. Then, a voice. Deep, cold, familiar. Charles Holloway. Jason. 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 Jason stayed silent, his muscles tensed. You really couldn't let this go, could you? Jason's eyes darted around the room. No weapons, no exit. Holloway chuckled. You're probably looking for a way out, but here's the thing. There isn't one. Jason clenched his jaw. You scared to face me, Holloway? A pause, then slow laughter. I don't need to, because in 5 minutes, that house is going up in flames. Jason's blood ran cold. It was a kill box. Jason rushed to the laptop, yanking out the hard drive. If he couldn't take the whole thing, he'd take the data. Smoke began seeping under the door. They'd started the fire. Jason sprinted to the far wall, looking for any weakness in the structure. He slammed his shoulder against it. Wood cracked but held firm. Flames licked the edges of the door now, heat rising fast. Jason grabbed the desk and hurled it at the wall. The wood split slightly. Not enough. He took a step back. One chance. Jason charged, full force, slamming into the wall with everything he had. The wood gave way. He crashed through into another room, but the fire was already spreading. A window, his only escape. Jason shielded his face and launched himself through the glass. Shards tore at his arms as he hit the ground outside, rolling onto the pavement. Behind him, the house erupted into an inferno. Jason gasped for breath, watching as the only evidence of HOA's crimes burned. But they didn't know one thing. He still had the hard drive. Jason pushed himself up. This wasn't over. This was just the beginning. The flames still burned in the distance as Jason sped away, gripping the stolen hard drive. His mind raced. He had proof now, but was running out of time. Then, his phone buzzed. A single text. "She's gone." Jason's grip tightened around the wheel. Olivia was missing, and he knew exactly who was behind it. Jason pulled into an alley, grabbed a burner phone and made a call. One ring, two, three. A voice finally answered. Detective Harris, one of the few honest cops left in the city. "Jason, what the hell is going on? You're all over the news." Jason frowned. "What?" Harris sighed. "HOA filed charges against you. Fraud, extortion, even assault. They flipped the story. You're a fugitive now." Jason clenched his jaw. Holloway was moving fast. But Jason wasn't going down without a fight. "Harris, Olivia's missing. If they got to her," Harris cut him off. "I'll look into it, but you need to be careful. They put a bounty on you. Every cop in the city is looking." Jason hung up. There was only one way out now. He had to go straight for Holloway. Jason knew Holloway wouldn't face him in the open, not unless he was forced to. So Jason did something Holloway didn't expect. He hacked into HOA's network and leaked a crucial document. A financial record linking Holloway to the city's police chief. Then he sent a message. Location? The abandoned warehouse near the docks. "You want me? Come get me." Jason sat back. He knew Holloway couldn't ignore this. And when he came, Jason would be waiting. Midnight. The warehouse was cold, empty. Jason stood in the shadows, watching as SUVs rolled in. Holloway had brought an army. Armed men poured out, scanning the area. Jason spotted Holloway in the center, calm, confident. Holloway smirked. "You really are as reckless as they say." Jason stepped forward. "Where's Olivia?" Holloway chuckled. "You should worry about yourself." He snapped his fingers. His men raised their weapons. Jason didn't wait. He moved. Jason launched forward, grabbing the nearest thug and twisting his wrist, gun dropping. He slammed an elbow into another, knocking him back. 2 down. A third rushed. Jason grabbed a metal pipe and swung. Crack! 3 down. But more kept coming. A punch caught Jason's ribs. He staggered but countered with a brutal knee to the attacker's face. Another grabbed him from behind. Jason slammed his head back, breaking the grip. Gunshots rang out. Jason dove behind a crate, bullets splintering wood. He grabbed a fallen pistol. 2 quick shots, tires blown out, cutting off their escape. Now, it was just him and Holloway. Holloway clapped slowly. "Impressive." Jason stepped forward. "You're done." Holloway smirked. "Am I?" Then Jason heard it. Sirens. Cops. Holloway chuckled. "They're not here to arrest me, Jason. They're here for you." Jason's heart pounded. Then, a voice from behind. "Drop your weapons! Hands up!" Jason turned. Detective Harris, holding a gun, but not at him. At Holloway. Holloway's smirk faltered. What the hell is this? Harris tossed a file at Holloway's feet. The leaked evidence. The truth. Your cops aren't coming, Holloway. The feds are. Holloway's face twisted in rage. You think this changes anything? Jason smirked. Yeah, I do. Just then, headlights flooded the warehouse. FBI, media, witnesses. Holloway turned, but there was nowhere left to run. A moment later, he was in cuffs. Jason exhaled. It was over. The next morning, HOA was dismantled, corrupt officials exposed. Olivia was found safe, shaken, but alive. And Jason, he was finally free. But as he walked away, he knew one thing: there would always be another battle. And when the time came, he'd be ready. The city lights flickered in the distance as Jason sat alone in his apartment, staring at the stack of evidence on his table. HOA was finished. Holloway was in cuffs. The corruption was exposed. So why did it feel like something was still off? Then, his phone rang. Unknown number. Jason hesitated, then answered. A deep, calm voice. You think this is over? Jason's grip tightened. Who is this? A low chuckle. You've been playing checkers while we've been playing chess. Then, click. The line went dead. Jason's pulse quickened. Something bigger was coming. Jason raced to the hospital. Olivia had been found. But when he walked into the room, his heart dropped. She was barely conscious, bruises along her arms. Her lips cracked, eyes hollow. She tried to speak, but her voice was weak. Jason, they wanted me to tell you. Jason leaned in. Tell me what? Her hands trembled as she whispered. Holloway wasn't in charge. Someone else, someone bigger, was pulling the strings. Jason's stomach sank. Who? She swallowed hard, pain in her eyes. I don't know. But they wanted you to stop. They said, if you keep digging, they'll come for you next. Jason clenched his fists. He wasn't backing down. Jason drove through the city, his mind racing. If Holloway wasn't the real boss, then who was? He pulled into a parking garage, stepped out, and opened the hard drive. Lines of transactions, emails, secret communications. Then he saw a name. A new player. A name he didn't recognize. C. Ashford. Jason's eyes narrowed. Who the hell was Ashford? His gut told him. This was the real fight. Then, a sudden noise behind him. Jason turned. Headlights flashed. A black SUV sped toward him. He jumped aside just in time as the car screeched past, barely missing him. Jason hit the ground, rolling to his feet, but the SUV was already gone. This wasn't a warning. This was a declaration of war. Jason exhaled, wiping blood from his temple. He looked down at the hard drive. It wasn't over. It was just beginning. Jason sat in his car staring at Olivia's hospital window. Then, he made a call. Detective Harris. I need to know everything about C. Ashford. A pause. Harris sighed. Jason, you don't want to go down this road. Jason's jaw clenched. He already had. Find me a name. Click. Jason leaned back, gripping the wheel. A storm was coming. And this time he had no idea how deep it went. To be continued.